IB Nation, welcome back to another episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast brought to you by FanDuel. We have an awesome show coming your guys' way. Like we talked about on yesterday's show, we switched up the format a little bit. We covered keys to victory yesterday. So today we are going to be talking through game records. We're going to give our game prediction. And then, Brian, the rest of the show today, we're just talking ball, man. We get to go over the rest of the slate of college football. We have a bunch of different games.
We're going to talk about more than 10 games. I'm not going to break them all down as thoroughly, but we're going to talk about over 10 games. Also, a reminder to everybody, we are doing an IB tailgate this weekend and next weekend. So you're definitely going to got the parking passes today. My guy Irish for Life 99 helped me out to secure those 2 parking passes. So we're going to get those set up. Going to have a tailgate this weekend. Obviously, we'll try to get set up around like 10 or 11. I'll let you guys know more for sure. Follow me on Twitter. You can see on the message boards. And then next week, we'll have a much longer one, even bigger spread. So if you're going to be at the game this weekend, come over to Joyce Lot. Find us. We'll have the Irish Breakdown flag. We're going to try to have it flying, but we'll have our Notre Dame tent. You'll see me. And then I'll put a picture on the board and tweet out what light pole that we'll be at. So, yeah, very, very excited about that. Very excited about that.
A lot of good stuff happening today, and we're going to get started by talking through what our game predictions are for the Notre Dame-NC State game. Reminder, that game kicks off at 3:30 p.m. this Saturday. This is the dreaded Peacock-only game, but you can also listen to it on Notre Dame radio. You can, if you're going to go to the game, you can be there. If you're going to watch it out in public, I can't do those things. I can't watch Notre Dame games out in public. I'm a little too loud. Got to be somewhere where I can kind of be in my own space. But 3:30 p.m. this Saturday. Quick reminder to everybody, Notre Dame is favored by 22.5 points. The over-under for the game is set at 60.5 right now.
Trev, I really thought that number was going to go down as the week went on, and it grew. Like, I'm very surprised by that. Like, very surprised by that. But hope it plays out that way. Really hope it plays out that way.
Man.
It'd be nice. I'm not someone who likes good games when it's my team. Whether, and again, I don't watch NFL anymore, but when it was the Broncos, whether it was the Reds, whether it was the Celtics back in the day when I used to watch the NBA, whether it's Notre Dame, whether it was Michigan basketball back in the day, it didn't matter. I don't like close games. I'd rather be a blowout than a close loss. Because I don't have to deal with the thanks of, we might win, and then boom. Like, I'd rather Miami 2017 than BC 1993. Like honestly, especially if you're not going to get a shot to play for the title. It'd be one thing if like you're still going to get your shot to play for the title, but like 93, they didn't get a rematch. So yeah, just the angst of the moment, it gets to me. So I'm hoping that the spread turns out to be what it is. That's how the game kind of plays out. It'll be fun.
You and me both, man. We're going to be talking about the spread a little bit tonight. Vince and I are tonight on the spread option on the CFB Nation channel, 8 p.m. Eastern time. Make sure you tune into that one as well. But Brian, this is to your point, this is a big game for Notre Dame. At the start of the week, we talked about how these next 2 games between NC State and USC were going to be huge. Notre Dame is now in game number 2 of their 3-game homestead before their second bye week of the season. And at the start of the season, obviously we didn't know how the season was going to be right now. We assumed worst case scenario, you go 1-1, you split the first 2 games, and then reality sets in, and then Notre Dame is where they're at. But at the start of the season, we did talk about how this was the game that we had slated as Notre Dame's trap game, and it's still for a good reason. Now, they're at the point in their season where they can't overlook anybody. Every week is a playoff game. But with that being said, man, this is still going to be an interesting matchup on Saturday.
It is. I mean, look, they are who we thought they were, right? That's kind of my take on NC State, meaning they're not always the most disciplined team in the world. That's why they're going to lose games that they shouldn't lose. But they're also going to beat some teams maybe that you don't think they should beat because they're also very talented. And I actually think Dave Dorn and his staff have recruited well. I just don't think they develop all that great. And I just don't think that they necessarily get the most out of their players. But NC State is who we thought they were. We thought going into the year, Trevor, when we previewed them, part of the reason that we thought this was a trap game is because upsets, like the recipe for upsets, by more often than not, and it's been different for Notre Dame in recent years because their offense hasn't been very good. But when you look around college football, a lot of times the upsets that happen are teams that can outscore you. And like you look in teams that have a dynamic quarterback. Well, NC State can score. They've got really athletic receivers. They've got a talented running back, and they've got a dynamic quarterback. And that's what makes it a little bit like, how's this one going to go? And it's a game that Notre Dame should win. It's a game that if Notre Dame plays their B+ or better game, it won't be competitive. But it's a game that also anything less than your B+ could get you beat. And that's what I'm really looking forward to. Yeah,
this one's going to be, I'm hoping to what you said earlier, this isn't a nail biter at the end of the day. Hopefully Notre Dame can come in and handle business. That's the goal. And that would make for a much easier Saturday afternoon for you and I both. But at the end of the day, this is going to be an important game for Notre Dame. They, started out the season 0-2. They've now ripped off 3 straight. Goal is to get to the bye week at 5-2. And then we're right back into the playoff discussion talking about Notre Dame and where they stand. But you have to handle business these next 2 weeks, and it starts with NC State, Brian. But you're right. This is a very, very important game. And when you look at Notre Dame, it's important for a couple different reasons. Obviously, yes. One, it's important, big picture, they have to continue winning. But it's also important when you look at either side of the ball. The offense is coming off of their, yes, you could call it most lackluster performance since week 1. And the defense is slowly ascending, but this is going to be the game that tells us, okay, is this now becoming a trend? Or were Boise State and Arkansas somewhat kind of a flash in the pan, and now they're resorted back to who they were the first 2.5 games? It's really important.
Yeah, it's both games are going to tell us if what we saw last week was a trend. One of them we want to be a trend, the other one we don't. Offensively, we don't want that to be a trend. And honestly, Trevor, I don't think it will be. And our predictions will kind of show that out. I don't think it will be a trend, but you never know. But defensively, you hope that does become a trend. And I've got a couple articles out on the IB, and I'll have a few more out over the next couple of days. But this is going to be a tough test for the defense. I'll put it to you like this: if the Notre Dame defense does what we want it to do schematically, and keeps NC State at 24 points or less, that to me is a sign of they've turned the corner. This is who they are. That's the kind of offense this is. So let's say the game's like 38-24, 34-24, 31-20, anything like that, where the defense scores 20 or NC State scores 24 points. That's not an elite job by the defense, but that's a good job by the defense, because you're not going to hold them to less than 24 if you don't play well, and if you don't have some sort of game plan that's geared to play to your potential, unless NC State does what Arkansas did, which is, for all the good things Notre Dame did, Arkansas left a lot of points on the board because of their own mistakes. First drive of the game, they settled for a field goal because their quarterback throws a bad ball to a wide open guy on 3rd and 4. That wasn't the Notre Dame defense doing anything. 2 series later, they throw a swing route on 3rd and 5. Running back is wide open to get to the first down, and the quarterback just misses them. Like, that's not the Notre Dame defense doing anything. Last week against Boise, the Notre Dame defense was making stops. It wasn't about, if Boise makes this play, if he looks at this open receiver, there was none of that. You break down the film, you're like, no, that was a dominant performance. That wasn't Boise shooting themselves in the foot. That was a flat out, you whooped their butts. And so I want to see that trend. So that's what's really interesting about this game, Trev, is again, we're going to learn a lot about this football team in every phase this weekend. And I'm looking forward to it, because you just want to know, right? And that's what, you learn about a team as you get deeper into the season, is you start to find out, okay, this is who they are. You can look back and, 7, 8, 9 games in and say, okay, these are the anomalies. These are the games that define that team. Like, by the time we got to November, we could look back at Northern Illinois and Miami of Ohio and say those were more anomalies. That was part of the growth of that football team I had to go through. This is more who you are. And it really came out of, we talked about how this team really turned a corner after week 5 last year. Defense was more consistent. Offense started to dominate. That's when the D-line started to really take over on the defensive side of the ball. Offensively, they started to find their groove. They put up 49 on Stanford. You put up over 50 on Navy. And you hope that that's kind of the game 5 is when the launch point happens for Notre Dame, because Louisville was a very similar game to Boise State. Better team last year than the one you faced this past week. But the offense did some good things, had some big plays, but it also left some stuff on the field and had a turnover that gave Louisville a short field, and your special teams had a turnover. So, like, they even made more mistakes last year than they did in this game, which is why Boise State only had 7 points compared to 24 for Louisville, because let's be honest, 14 of Louisville's 24 points were gifts from Notre Dame, with the fumbled kick return and then the Jadarian Price fumble. But it was that game where, Trev, we came out of it thinking, like, this team is close. We started to see flashes of who this team is, and then boom, they really started to take off. And that's kind of been, I don't know that I love it, but that's kind of been Marcus Freeman's MO at Notre Dame. Even last year, in the great run last year, I mean, you look at 2023, you could say that's the exception, but they never really played anybody good till week 5. And then they went to like a 3-game rut. And then second half of the year, they were pretty darn good outside of the Clemson game. 2022, same thing. Notre Dame starts 0-2, barely beats Marshall. Good wins over North Carolina, BYU. You lose to Stanford at game 6. And then after that, they just were pretty much dominant till the USC game at the end of the year when, they had to go try to stop that Caleb Williams offense without Cam Hart, without Tariq Bracy. So that's where I kind of look at it and say, these teams usually under Marcus Freeman take off in the second half of the year. Does that start this weekend? Is this team going to be like that? Well, we're going to find out. And that's one of the things that makes me excited about this team. On top of the fact, I just think it's 2 talented football teams, and I do like when 2 talented football teams play each other.
Yeah, I'm going to be very interested to see if that trend continues from Boise State. No, Marcus Freeman talks about it all the time in his press conference about how they need, self-scouting and they have to go back and look in the mirror. Well, ideally, maybe moving forward, maybe in 2026, you don't need 4 or 5 games to sit down and look in the mirror and do enough self-scouting to know who you are. Ideally, that just kind of happens right out of the gate. But different conversation for a different day. The conversation we're having today, Brian, we are going through our predictions for the Notre Dame-NC State game this Saturday afternoon, 3:30 p.m. in the stadium. I'll go ahead and get us kicked off, Brian. And then typically how we do this is we give our score prediction, and then we talk through how we believe the game is going to unfold. And then after that, we're going to be talking some game wreckers on offense and defense. So to get us kicked off here, Brian, I have Notre Dame winning this one. I have them winning 41-27. That is my final score prediction, the Irish over the Wolfpack. I'm with you. I think the offense gets back on track this week. And some people hear that when I tell people, the offense has to get back on track, or Notre Dame's offense is preparing for a quick rebound or something like that. People hear that and immediately associate that with, well, I don't think they played bad against Boise State. They moved the ball. Agreed. Yes, they did. They moved the ball seemingly without penalties at will and still only put up 28 points on the board. We're talking about an offense that scored 105 combined points between Purdue and Arkansas. Arkansas was on the road. Then they come back home. You have 2 turnover on downs. Both of them are on your side of the 50. You had some penalties that put you behind the sticks. Those are the procedural things that we're talking about, because this offense is good enough where if they don't shoot themselves in the foot, they are just going to naturally put up 30 to 40 points a game, depending on the opponent. That is how good this offense can be if they don't beat themselves. I see them getting back on track. Defensively, I am cautiously optimistic, I think is the best way to word how I feel about this defense right now. But I'm hesitant to have confidence in Chris Ash specifically with this game plan, with this style of offense. Is he going to be aggressive? Are you going to maintain that aggressive philosophy despite going against an offense not like Boise State that is going to spread you out, try to take shots on the perimeter? Because like we talked about all week, it was no secret what Boise State was going to try to do on offense. Much different animal when you're defending, Noah Rogers and Justin Jolly and Hollywood Smothers. CJ Bailey's a very different type of quarterback than Maddox Madsen is. So I'm cautiously optimistic about the defense as a whole. And I'm a little hesitant around Chris Ash's game plan. But if it pans out the way that I do think that it will, I see this being a 41-27 game. Back and forth in the first half, but the third quarter is going to be key, like it has all season for Notre Dame. Notre Dame has outscored their opponents 42-10 in the third quarter this season. They haven't allowed an opponent to put any points on the board in the third quarter since Texas A&M. And so,
well, the only touchdown of the third quarter was the first one that they went through in the Miami game, and so they haven't allowed a touchdown since the first drive of the third quarter.
Yep. So the third quarter is going to be very, very crucial for Notre Dame in this one, and then that's when I think this one kind of opens up. And I think Carr's going to take advantage of some mismatches in the passing game with Raritan and Love and Price against their linebackers and safeties. And I do think at some point in the third quarter, the defense is going to come away with a big turnover that really breaks it open. My bet is for it to be on Christian Gray. I think the stars are kind of aligning in the spot. I'm 1 for 1 so far. I called Tay Johnson with an interception last week, so I'm going to go Christian Gray with an interception this week. So we'll see if that trend continues. But that's how I see this game playing out. I think that, to your point that you talked about earlier, Brian, Notre Dame kind of finds their footing in Game 6, and then they're just going to start rolling. And so I think they come away with the victory 41-27 in South Bend on Saturday.
Can I ask a follow-up question? So
yep.
So with your prediction, 41-27, is that with you? Obviously, we don't know. We got to see it and all that. Is that with you thinking that the defense figures it out? Or is it more so like kind of more Arkansas-ish type of game plan? Like, what are your thoughts there?
I would say somewhere in between Arkansas and Boise State. I don't think they're going to be as passive against Arkansas. Some of it is just going to be the talent of the NC State offense.
Okay.
You know, sometimes when you have two good opponents going up against each other, especially NC State's offense, they're just going to make some plays. I'm high on Hollywood Smothers. I could see him ripping off one, but not so much to where they're just playing passive and back for basically 3.5 quarters until they decide to flip the switch. So
okay. And then do you have NC State scoring late?
Yes.
Or is it okay?
Yeah,
so
I
have
have
it like 41-20 and then they score a late touchdown.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That helps me give more context to that. I'm actually going to do something I don't normally do, Trev. I'm going to make 2 predictions. Yeah. I'm going to do that. Yep. Because you know why? Because I can. But it actually, there's some logic to it. So go with me here.
Okay.
Here's my actual prediction, right? This is the one I'm going to put in our article yesterday as my prediction is. Because with Chris Ash, when it comes to Chris Ash, I am 100% in. You got to show me that last week wasn't the anomaly. So my prediction in that regard is 45-31 because we see this in a lot of similar ways. I don't think NC State can run with Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame is going to be too balanced for them. I think their offense is very undisciplined. As long as Notre Dame comes out and plays their game, I don't even mean like you've got to play a perfect game, just play your game. And I think they move the ball on NC State. And I do think we're going to get a turnover I love your prediction there. We're going to get a turnover by the defense that's going to set up the offense for a score if they don't get a score themselves. So I'm with you on that. But I just don't have a lot of faith that Chris Ash is going to really has it all figured out. Now, I think that we won't see a repeat of Texas A&M for a couple of reasons. Number one, they got better players in the field now. Getting Dallas Golden on the field, getting Tay Johnson on the field like almost every snap with a Don Schuler it's a different animal than what we saw. Just that personnel alone might have been enough to win the Texas A&M game, even with the absurdity of the defensive play calling in that game and defensive game plan in that game. And so that's why I see Notre Dame winning by 14. I think this is how the game would have gone against Texas A&M had they had the right people on the field at that time. So I go 45-31, and I could see it being a thing where NC State gets a late score, but I think NC State will move the ball on Notre Dame in this scenario. But they'll just be playing catch up after a while. And I do think the defense. I think the halftime score is going to be a lot closer than the end of game score in this scenario as well. Because to your point, they have been a good third quarter team. And really, they weren't great the first 2 third quarters. As we've talked about, A&M missed some chances for big plays in the third quarter, but they've been very good in the third quarter in the last 3 games. So that's kind of my prediction because I'm just not going to blindly believe that the Boise State game plan, because as a football coach, I can look at that game plan and say, this is exactly why they were more aggressive, because of who Boise State is, because of the offense they're going to face. But now you're facing a much different animal. A team that's going to go a lot more 11 personnel, a team that's going to spread the field more, a team that's going to throw the ball more effectively, got better athletes on the perimeter, and I see them looking a lot more like they did it against Arkansas. But C.J. Bailey, to me, is a better quarterback than Taylor Green. And I think the receiver talent is better than what Arkansas had. The tight end talent is better than what Arkansas had. I would argue the running back talent is that Arkansas had better depth at running back. NC State's got the better starter. and the guy that scares me a little bit more because to your point, Trev, he can rip off big plays. He can get on the perimeter where, Mike Washington and Braylon Russell were big guys. Were going to more hammer you. They weren't exactly like shifty big play guys. So that's kind of where I see that. But Trev, here's my other one. If Notre Dame's defense employs a similar philosophy, not game plan, philosophy that we saw last week, then I have 45-16. And here's why I say philosophy, because the game plan that Notre Dame is going to use is not going to be like Boise State's. It can't be. You can't just like regurgitate the game plan. Like it, think of a funny scenario where Chris Ash is getting ready to go out to the game and he can't find his call sheet. So he just grabs the Boise State one and says, well, it's the same thing. We're going to be fine. No, very different formational usage, very different schemes, very different play calls, very different skill players. Not skill play like these guys weren't good, they're great, but just how Boise uses their receivers and tight end is way different than how NC State's going to use theirs. The philosophy has to be the same. Aggressive, attacking with your D-line, letting your linebackers run downhill, letting your defense play more man coverage. And now, again, still using zone. They were really effective in zone stuff against Boise, but they were a much more heavy man team against them. If they do that, Trev, I don't think this game is going to be close. I don't. And I see early in the game, I think NC State moves the ball relatively well early because this is the type of offense that even out and out Golden coach defense or a Clark Lee coach defense or a Marcus Freeman coach defense or a Mike Elko coach defense would have needed a quarter and a half to get used to the speed of what this team can go with. That's football. Even good defenses take some time at times to say these guys are pretty fast. We got to figure some stuff out. So I think they'll hit some big plays early, even in this new scenario. And then they hold them to field goals. That's why I go to 16. They hold them to a few field goals, and then they'll hit a big play at some point in time to get a score, whether it sets them up for a score. But I think overall, if we see a similar philosophy to what we saw last week, I think Notre Dame, and here's why, I think Notre Dame dominates NC State in the trenches. And they don't let Hollywood Smothers take this game over, to your point, because they're going to beat them up front. Best way to make sure C.J. Bailey and Hollywood Smothers don't go off, Trev, dominate them in the trenches. That's going to be the key. So that's where my two predictions are from. I have my official prediction because I am absolutely in show me mode with Chris Ash. Kind of like what you and I were going into Arkansas with Marcus Freeman, and will he, let Mike Denbrock do his thing, or will he kind of pull the reins back? He didn't. He let him go. He let him work. And when he let him work, Notre Dame rolled and Notre Dame dominated. And so if we see that defensively, hey, let's ramp this thing up. Let's go after these guys. You got a sophomore quarterback on the field. Let's go after him. That's when I think Notre Dame rolls. And there's like a lot of, 38-12, 42-13, 42-17, 41-13, 48-20. Those are all scores that will happen because the defense employs that kind of game plan. If they don't, I still like Notre Dame in this game, but I think it's going to be more of that 45-31 type of performance. So that's where I'm at on this game. But if the predictions that we're saying, if my second prediction comes true, or even your prediction comes through, Trev, where you have it 41-20, but then you have NC State scoring a late garbage touchdown, then that tells me that Chris Ash is truly turning the corner, and that's going to make me feel really good about what they're going to do in the final 6 games of the season.
Well, here's to hoping that the latter of your predictions is the correct one, because yes, I would love to see that. You said 45-16?
I got 45 for the offense either way.
Yep.
But I have 45-16.
Love that. I love that. Well, Brian, in order for some of these predictions, goodness gracious, to come true. Okay. I think we might just have to restart. I'm just absolutely.
We're going to start over, folks. There we go.
Welcome back to the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Brought to you by goodness gracious. So, in order for some of these predictions to come true, there we go. I was going to get it eventually. Notre Dame's going to have some game records on offense and defense. Let's snake these. Let's go back and forth. Mm-hmm. I'll get us kicked off with offense. I have 3 on offense and 3 on defense, just to kind of give you a preface here. And my first one on offense is kind of a package duo, and I'm sure you know where I'm going with this one, but it's Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price, but for different reasons. For Jeremiah Love, I think he can be very effective in this week's passing game. And I think Mike Denbrock has done a really good job of utilizing him in different ways depending on the opponent that they played. We talked about how many matchups that they can take advantage of out in space. We talked about pass game ISOs against Arkansas. I don't think it's a mystery that Jeremiah Love ended the game with 5 receptions.
Mm-hmm.
Against Boise State, it was kind of, hey, this is kind of our guys versus your guys. We think that Jeremiah Love is going to be able to put in some work in the trenches and went for over 100 yards rushing. This is a game that kind of feels like an Arkansas type of game where, hey, get your athletes in space one-on-one. I talked about yesterday, Sean Brown, one of their linebackers, he's given up 20 receptions on 26 targets. For 256 receiving yards, he's given up 178 yards after the catch. And then if he's not playing, and then Caden Fordham is also not great in coverage either. As a combined duo, they've given up 39 receptions for 339 receiving yards and 3 to 4 touchdowns. Not great. And so I think that you can really take advantage of Jeremiah Love in some of those situations. But Jadarian Price is one where he is going to be your impact change of pace runner. And that's something that we've seen all season long. Jadarian Price has averaged more yards per carry in every single game this season for Notre Dame outside of Purdue, where Jeremiah Love had 0.1 rushing yards more per carry than Jadarian did. So he has came in and shown that he can be that, you have Love going out in motion, getting out in space, catching passes, and then Jadarian Price can come in and be that slasher type of running back. I have those two as a package duo as my first game records. Brian, what about you?
I dig it. Obviously, that's honestly just kind of like you said, insert this duo each week as potential game wreckers. But I do think in this game, it's good not to just assume they're going to be game wreckers. I think at this point in time, the offense fuels when those two guys are going.
Yeah.
And we saw that last week. CJ Carr had a bit of an off game, but they were still able to move the ball and average 7.2 yards. I mean, think about that. Your off game was 7.2 yards per play. And your longest play was only 46 yards. It's not like you had like against Indiana last year, we had a 98-yard touchdown run that kind of skewed your overall numbers. I mean, your longest play was 46. Your next longest was only 36. I mean, it wasn't like they had some cheap plays. Their efficiency on the run game was still close to 60% in the game. So like they're really finding their groove. But I'm gonna go a little bit different here, Trev, with my first one. And I'm actually going to go with a unit. You kind of do it. I'm going with a unit. I'm going with the Notre Dame offensive line. And if they're going to win this game and put up the kind of points that we're predicting, that people in the chat are predicting, this offensive line is going to have a big day. And I thought about going with Anthony Knapp because we talked about him yesterday in the matchups. I talked about maybe going with, Ashton Craig and Billy Shrouth, or maybe Ashton Craig and Gerby, or maybe just Gerby because of the Brandon Cleveland matchup that we talked about yesterday. At end of the day, I think the whole unit has to play like they're supposed to. And what happened last year against Stanford in Game 6 is you started to see the offensive line kind of figure some stuff out. There still were mistakes, and last year's line was more inexperienced than this year's line. You still had Sam Pendleton in the starting lineup. You still had true freshman Anthony Knapp in the starting lineup. Rocco was in there. Pat Coogan was in there. We didn't see Billy Shrouth come back yet. Emil was going into start number 6 for him. It was still a young unit. So you get the Anthony Knapp hold early and, a couple misses here and there. But like overall, I mean, they pushed Stanford around in that game. And they started to really find their groove. And then the next week against Georgia Tech, the line played even better. And then the next week you get Billy Shrouth back and the line really starts to take off. And that's what I'm kind of hoping that we see from this team is this offensive line just continues to ascend as opposed to just, okay, you beat up 3 bad opponents. Now let's see what you do against, some big boys or some, that type of thing. So I want to see that type of growth from them. And I think, honestly, they are going to carry this football team. If the Notre Dame offense struggles to move the ball and score, it'll be because they get beat up front. If Notre Dame hangs 40-plus points on this team, which they're more than capable of, 40 to 50 points on this team, it'll be because the offensive line comes out right away and says, hey, we're going to dominate you for 60 minutes. So good luck. Buckle up. Make sure them chin straps are buckled tight. Make sure you got your big boy pants on today because we're about to put in some work. And so that's my number one game records is we're going to look back. If Notre Dame does what we think they can do in this game, you picked 41 points. I picked 45. People in the chat picking in the 40s. It's because the offensive line said, we got this. And Jeremiah and Jadarian aren't getting touched until they get to the second level, which is what happens when this team has really worked. They're getting into this, they're getting into holes, open holes with one guy to beat, and they're making a miss because the offensive line is putting in that work. If they do that, I'm going to feel really good about their chances of scoring a lot of points and winning this football game. So I'm going to go O-line number one. Who else you got on offense, Trev?
Next one on offense, FanDuel actually has set for receiving yards at over under 28.5, which if I were a betting man, which I am, I would think would be extremely, extremely juicy. And I'm talking about tight end Eli Raridan. We've talked about him all week. One, I'm shocked that his over-under is set at 28.5. Kind of understand it because he's somewhat cooled off, I guess you could say, after his back-to-back over 80-yard performances against Miami and Texas A&M. But we talked about the matchups for this game and how they can really take advantage of when Eli Raridan's to the field, they'll put linebacker Sean Brown on him. And when he's to the boundary, they'll put a 5'9" safety and Ronnie Royal on him. I think those are matchups that Mike Denbrock is going to be willing to take advantage of. And we have also seen C.J. Carr very comfortable targeting Eli Raridan in this offense. I think that there's a good chance down in the red zone, especially if Ronnie Royal is on him, that Eli Raridan could come down with his first touchdown catch of the season. Malachi Fields has shown that he's a red zone target. Jordan Faison has shown that he's just really between the 20s target if you think about it. I mean, that guy is somebody that's ripping off comeback routes, dig routes, things like it's his job because it is. Eli Raridan is somebody that I think could have a really big game. So my second game wrecker, going with the tight ends to the surprise of nobody, I have Eli Raridan as my second game wrecker. Brian, what about you?
I would have honestly been disappointed with you if you didn't have him in there this week, Trev. We might have had to say, man, I don't know what your deal is, but we haven't heard you talk about Eli Raridan enough in the last few games. I think you're spot on. And the reason I would have been disappointed because I think there's a lot to that. I'm kind of thinking bigger picture here this week, Trev, as opposed to zeroing in on like this guy here, this guy there. And that basically is, I thought about Malachi. I think Malachi could have a big game. I thought about Jordan Faison. He could just keep doing what he does. Hopefully Will Pauling can improve on some things and have a better performance. Maybe Micah Gilbert gets in there, Eli Raridan. But I'm going with the trigger man. I'm going with the point guard. I'm going with C.J. Carr. Because if C.J. Carr is the quarterback that I think he is, he will bounce back well from last week. That doesn't mean he's going to play a perfect game, but I think mentally he's going to bounce back. He'll still have some redshirt freshman throws and some redshirt freshman mistakes because he's a redshirt freshman. But I think that he's not going to put so much pressure on himself to go out there and be perfect all the time because of how he played last week that it then snowballs and becomes a second bad game. I think CJ is going to come out and play well. I do think he's going to throw a pick in this game. He hasn't thrown a pick since second game of the year. Picks are going to happen. I think he's going to probably try to force a ball, and then that's just going to kind of piss him off, and he's going to come out the next two series and just rip NC State up. That's kind of what he's done this season. Is after I think they've scored a touchdown on each of the next drives after he's thrown a pick this year, I believe. Am I correct on that? I know he did against Texas A&M, but I thought he did against Miami as well. I have to go. I know it
was a scoring drive, but I don't remember if it was a field goal drive or a touchdown drive.
Nick, let's see here. I'm going to go look that up. So after the interception, they had a field goal. So field goal, then touchdown. So he's led them to points after his two interceptions the last two times. So I just think he's going to be really good in this game and just distribute the ball all over the place. I think it's going to be Malachi's going to get his, Faison's going to get his, Pauling's going to get his, Love's going to get his, Price might even get some work in there. Raridan's going to get his. I hope that him and Micah Gilbert can connect because he had Micah Gilbert torched the Boise State corner on the last play of the game. And if CJ gets the ball out a little quicker and leads him a little bit more, that's a touchdown. So hopefully they can get that one back out. But yeah, I just think this is going to be a day where CJ Carr is dealing. I really do. That's kind of my two big picture ones, Trev. And I think a byproduct of that is some of the pass catchers and skill players having a big day. You got anybody else in your game wreckers prediction?
Last one is Ashton Craig. He'll be matched up head up against Brandon Cleveland throughout the game. It won't be every single snap. That's one that I'm going to be keeping my eye on. Ashton Craig has been steady this season, and he's put on a really good performance. And it's not surprising. We talked about him when he returned back healthy and when he was deemed the starting center for Notre Dame to start the season, that we're talking about somebody who hasn't allowed a sack in the 6 games that he started. And some of those were impactful games. Texas A&M 2024, bowl game in 2023. Came in against Clemson in 2023 when Zeke Correll got hurt and didn't allow a sack. And so he's only allowed 1 sack this year against Texas A&M. No hits on the quarterback, only 8 total pressures all year. But he's going to be tested because he hasn't had that many players play head up on him. And Brandon Cleveland, you are going to get his best. I know that's a cliche, but like we talked about earlier in the week, Brian, when the lights are the brightest, I understand the game's getting kicked off at 3:30, but when you're playing on a national stage and you're trying to put some NFL film out there, you show what you're able to do against the Notre Dame offensive line. So Ashton Craig is going to have to prepare to get Brandon Cleveland's best. I think he's going to have a big game in the run and pass protection. That's going to be huge in both phases. So my last one on offense is Ashton Craig. Let's talk a little defense, Brian. And again, this is going to be the side of the ball it's going to dictate how we're going to feel going into the USC week. At least that's how it is for me. I'm not sure how it is for you, but depending on how the defense performs on Saturday will dictate my mood Monday through Friday next week.
If they like, we kind of go back to the predictions thing, Trev. If they look like they looked last week philosophically, I'm going to feel a lot better about next weekend. If they look like they look against Arkansas, I'm not going to feel as good.
No.
Well, hold on. They scored 13 points against Notre Dame. I get that. But as we've talked about, Arkansas missed a lot of opportunities. And the reality is Arkansas, in my opinion, was the best offense Notre Dame has faced so far. Just as far as what they did, scheme, design, and all that kind of stuff. And, I mean, in Miami's 2 games against good teams, scored 27 and 28 points. They're a good offense. They're not a great offense. Texas A&M looked like a great offense against Notre Dame, but they haven't been a great offense against anybody else this season. They're 4th, 2nd in scoring right now. Arkansas, to me, is the best offense they face, but they don't have the athletes that NC State or USC have, and a receiver. Very similar style of quarterback to varying talent degrees and experience levels, but receiving core is much better. And so if the philosophy is right, I'll feel a lot better. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this unit is going to perform very much. And as we kind of do every week, it's going to start up front. And I'm going to go something a little bit different this week, Trev. I'm going to go with we've done a lot like Boubacar and different guys, and I got kind of 2 game records that I got my eye on for this game. The first one is Bryce Young, and it just seems to me like we've seen in the past a lot of times when a Notre Dame player gets to play like one of his home state schools, he just tends to kind of have his breakout performance, and we've just kind of seen that a little bit. And I look at Bryce Young being from North Carolina, playing NC State. He hasn't really had that breakout game yet, but I think the last 3 weeks he's kind of gotten better each week. And I think a breakout's coming. And I think there's going to be a lot of tension on Boubacar. There's going to be a lot of attention on the D tackles, but I think Bryce Young is a guy that I think is going to have a little bit of that breakout performance this week. I think this is the week we see Bryce have that really flashy get after. He's going to have his hands full because that left tackle for Jacarius Peak for NC State's good players only giving up 4 pressures all year. But I think Bryce is going to have a big game. Run game, setting the edge, being effective against the run, getting pressure on C.J. Bailey. I think all those things are going to be a factor for Bryce this week. So I've got Bryce Young as my game record for the Notre Dame defensive line.
I like that. I'm also going to work front to back, and I'm also going with an edge rusher, but I am going to go with Boubacar Traore. He's been sniffing around that impact game. He's been far and away their best and most consistent defensive end this season, but he hasn't had that like performance yet, where we sit back in the postgame, it's like, there he is. Like it's play here, a drive here. We talk about how good he's been in the run game, which has been really promising. But I'm waiting for Boubacar to have that game where it's like, he ends the day with 6-7 total pressures, a couple hits on the quarterback, couple sacks. I think he has that opportunity in front of him because their right tackle has given up the most pressures that they've allowed all season. He's given up 14. When you're going up against an edge rusher like Boubacar Traore, that doesn't really bode well. If you go back and turn on the film, which, Ryan, I know that you have, Boubacar was getting into the backfield pretty consistently against Boise State. Now you just have to finish. And I think this is the game that he puts it all together and finishes and comes away with a pretty gaudy looking stat line. So my first one on the defensive line is Boubacar Traore.
He has a very weird stat line so far on PFF. And during the bye week, I'm going to try to go back over the first 7 games and kind of do my own pressure numbers, Trev. So you and I will actually talk about that. But he is third on the defense in total pressures, according to PFF, with 10. I kind of feel like he has more than that. That's partly why I want to go back and break it down a little bit. But when you look at Boubacar's numbers, he's got 10. You know who's tied for the team lead? And you know the answer to that. I think you know the answer to this because you've looked at it. But it's the 2 guys tied for the team lead in pressures are Bryce Young and Donovan Heinisch. Donovan Heinisch doesn't surprise me because he had like 7 a couple weeks ago. So, you know, and we've seen him get pressures on the quarterback. But Bryce being at 14 surprised me a little bit. I know he had 5 last week, and so he obviously had a good game last week, but he had 4 against A&M, 2 against Arkansas. But Donovan Heinisch only has, if you look at that, here's the part that's odd. Of the 14 pressures for Bryce Young, 4 have resulted in a sack or a hit, according to PFF. Of Donnie's 14 pressures, only 3 have resulted in a sack or a hit. Kingston Williams is tied with Boubacar for third. Only 1 of his pressures has resulted in a sack or a hit. Of Boubacar's 10 pressures, 7 have resulted in a sack or hit on the quarterback. And you look at that and you're like, dude, that's a pretty impressive number. And you're like, at the end of the year, like that's pretty good production, you know, if you look at it. And so according to their numbers, I mean, he's basically on pace to have 11, 12 sacks by the time you get to your first bowl game. So I also agree with you that the film doesn't show a guy that's that dominant yet, but you see a guy that's really close to it. So what I think we'll see is, you know, the pressure numbers go up more than just he hits home. But part of that too has been also on Chris Ash, because we've seen snaps, Trev, where Boubacar destroys the guy he's going against, and he doesn't get in close to the quarterback because it's catch the shotgun, one drop, quick gather, bam, ball's out, and he has no shot. I keep thinking of that snap against Purdue. You and I were looking at it as we were watching the All-22. But there's that play where Boubacar comes off wide and just spins inside of the Purdue offensive tackle and just destroys him. Last week he would have had 3 sacks on that move if it was the way that the coverage played. And you just kind of get frustrated by it because you're like, dude, that's a great pass rush that you just wasted with your soft coverage. If Boubacar and or Bryce have the number 1 game record performance, I think that bodes very well for this defense, because I don't think they can have it without Chris Ash employing a game plan that looks similar to last week. I don't. What do you think?
No, we see that the same. It's about marrying up the coverage in the front. That's something that's been a hot topic of conversation in a lot of Marcus Freeman's press conferences really since the start of the season. Chris Ash is going to have to do everything he can from a back end standpoint to help support his pass rush to get home. Because you can, to your point, you can have the best pass rushing move, and you can have an arsenal of moves in your tool belt. But if a quarterback is getting the ball out in under a second, it doesn't really matter. It just doesn't. So I agree with you completely, Brian. Who's your next game wrecker? I know you have Bryce Young. Who else you got?
I'm going linebacker level next, Trev, and I'm going Drake Bowen. I think Drake is another guy that's just been kind of steadily getting closer and closer and closer to that big breakout game. I also think when him and Kingston are on the field together, it makes them both better. I just think it elevates the 2 of them. And again, a lot of what's funny is my prediction is based on Chris Ash not doing what he needs to do. My game records are predicted off of him doing what he needs to do. So if my game records are correct, it means Chris Ash is doing what he needs to do, and my score prediction will be wrong. But I think Drake was more impactful last week than a lot of people realize. You go back and break down the game, he was very impactful last week. And I think we're going to see that again. I think they're using him downhill a lot more. He even blitzed a little bit more against Arkansas, even though, he wasn't as consistently allowed to pass rushes as much as I would personally like. But Drake in 5 games has 7 pressures, Trevor, and 3 sacks plus hits on the quarterback, which means he's on pace to top what he did last year. Now he's also being used to pressure a lot more than he has, and he was used to, according to Pro Football Focus, pass rushed 14 times against Boise State. His previous high was 7 against Miami, and last year the highest he had last year was 13 against USC, and he had no pressures in that game. So you just look at his usage there. And last week he rushed 14 times, but he had 3 pressures, including 2 sacks. So he got to the quarterback twice in that game. And the way that PFF does it, if 2 guys get to the quarterback and get like a half a sack in the official statistics, it counts as a sack in PFF. So like when Kingston and Drake both got to the quarterback, I know you know this, Trev. I'm explaining this to the audience. They counted as 1 sack for each guy. So a lot of times you'll see like 7, 8 sacks. And you're like, Notre Dame only got like 4 sacks in that game. Yeah, but they counted halves in that. So that's kind of how that factored in. But I just think Drake's going to have a big game. Him and Hollywood Smothers is going to be having some bad dreams about the Notre Dame linebackers, I feel. And I think CJ Bailey's going to get planted by Drake a couple times as well. So I think Drake Bowen's my next game wrecker, especially if we see more of him and Kingston on the field together. I just think that duo, they seem to have and this doesn't mean I don't want to see Jaden Osbury. I love Jaden Osbury. He had 8. He tied for the team leading tackles last week with 8. He's a heck of a player, but it just seems to be when Drake and Kingston are on the field, they play off each other really well. They communicate really well. Their timing together on pressures is really good. I just think those 2 kids just have sort of that. I think of the movie Miracle and the hockey movie, and you've just got those the cone heads or whatever. They just, for whatever reason, just had that flow together. They just played well together. You've got those basketball duos where it's like, just I'm looking here throwing lobs and the other guy knows I'm doing it and he's banging it. That's just how I feel and it goes back to last year, Trev. I've been saying this for a while, like those 2 guys need to be on the field together. It's just different when they're on the field together. And if we see more of that, I think that's going to help continue to elevate Drake's game as well. But he's just steadily been getting better and better and better every year, or every game this season. And I think he has a big game as well for Notre Dame. What say you about your next?
I appreciate you taking Drake Bowen kind of out of the loop, because I had written down as my second one Kingston or Drake. And you explained as to why for Drake Bowen. I agree with everything you said. I'm going to go with Kingston Viliamasa. One, for the reasons that you talked about they're just a really good duo when they're on the field together. But I think Kingston's skill set is going to be utilized heavily in this game as an edge rusher and as a box linebacker. Hollywood Smothers is a good running back, and I've been talking about him all week. You don't average 6.9 yards a carry carrying the ball 100 times for no reason. It's a good running back. And I understand some people see the logo on the helmet, the name on the jersey, he plays for NC State. If he's better, he'd go somewhere else. Well, I know what he's doing at NC State. And he has 693 rushing yards, 5 touchdowns, and is averaging 6.9 yards per carry. Kingston Viliamaasa's skill set is going to be suited extremely well in this game. I think he's also going to be able to give CJ Bailey some headaches. Yesterday in Keys to Victory, we talked about making him uncomfortable. We have seen quarterbacks when 27 is lined up in the A-gap, even showing pressure, starts to speed up a quarterback's internal clock a little bit. Opposing offenses circle number 27 on the scouting report every week. You could tell because quarterbacks' internal clock starts to get sped up a little bit. And I understand, too, mine would be, too, if I saw Kingston Viliamasa lining up to send me some pressure up the A-gap as well. But I think that he's going to have a couple of big hits in this game. I just feel like this is one where the defense, and again, this is sticking along the lines of ideally Chris Ash lets this defense be who they are supposed to be. But I just feel like this defense is going to be flying around on Saturday, and 27 is going to come away with some really, really big hits.
Dude, I really
think so.
I really hope that they're more aggressive this week, dude. I really do.
Yeah,
I really do. We'll see. We'll see.
Here's hoping.
Back end, I think we both have the same guy here, Christian Gray. Mm-hmm. Christian Gray is going to be a game wrecker in this game. He's going to be. The question is going to be, who does it favor, NC State or Notre Dame? And because they're going to go at him. They're going to go at him, and if he doesn't play well, they're going to beat him. And if he plays well, he's going to be a major impact on this game, possibly. And keep in mind, a field cornerback is going to give up more catches than a boundary cornerback, more often than not, if they're both very good. So Christian's going to give up some completions. That's part of the game. I keep reminding people that, if you look at Leonard Moore last year, the game where he allowed the most receptions against him last year was the Louisville game. And that just so happened to be the game where he played field cornerback. Gave up 6 of 7 targets in that game for 60 yards. Most completions he's I believe still to this day ever allowed in a game. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it happened when he was playing field corner. So it's just the nature of it. But a good field corner, when he's on, is also going to make a lot of plays. And for Christian, that doesn't just mean in coverage. It means obviously breaking up passes, maybe a big interception, but it also means when they're running the outside, when they're doing their outside runs, when they're showing outside screens, when they're using their perimeter pass game, you've got to be a strong tackler as well. The thing that encouraged me about Christian last week, he's much more physical than we had seen him as a tackler and in route. And he wasn't, like you pointed out, that play against Chris Marshall, where he was in phase, and what we've seen from Christian most of the second half of last year and the first few games of this year is he would then immediately, he's in phase and he'll just start grabbing the jersey, start reaching for it. He didn't. He stayed right there in phase, kept his hands on the body, and then was in position to, force the guy to push off, because he was in position to shoot his hands and, maybe break up the pass. So I think Christian Gray is going to have a big impact in this game. And look, I think you could point to any secondary player. I could see Dallas Golden having a big game. I could see Tay obviously having a big game. Don Schuler, Leonard Moore, obviously. But I think Christian Gray is the one I'm going with, because it's going to happen. It just, we don't know which side. Is it going to be a game wrecker because he wrecked the game because he got beat a lot? Or is it going to be a game wrecker because he plays the way we know he's capable of playing? And he's gotten the last 2 weeks, he's been better and better. And I was more encouraged by last week's performance even than I was Arkansas, even though you could argue he played better against Arkansas than he did against Boise State, because he's just a more natural boundary receiver. We saw that against Arkansas. Like, that's when Christian's really in his element. As a field corner, he's not always as comfortable. But he played field last week. Because remember, he played boundary against Arkansas because Leonard Moore was out. But last week, as a field guy, he played very well. It looked like the early part of last year version of Christian Gray. Confident, driving on the ball, tackling well, you not getting grabby in coverage. And I think we're going to see that again. So I'm predicting that he's going to be a game wrecker in a positive way. I'm simply saying that, but it's going to happen one way or the other, because if he doesn't play well, he's going to get beat a lot, because I'm quite confident that NC State's going to go at him. I mean, you have to pick your poison when you're going against a team like Notre Dame. Like, okay, well, yeah, I mean, we love Noah Rogers and Terrell Anderson, but we're also not stupid, and we're not going to throw the ball 10 times at Leonard Moore. Because like that hasn't worked out for people the last couple of years. And I don't know if I want to go up that number 9, because he's been like this close to picking off a pass in each of the last 3, like multiple passes in each of the last 3 games. And that number 8, I don't know if I want to get my receivers drilled by that guy. Well, let's give number 6 a try, because he's been so up and down. So I think Dallas and Christian are both going to get targeted a lot in this game. And how they perform is going to go a long way towards how well Notre Dame plays on defense.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you said. Christian Gray was my game wrecker in the secondary by default. They would look. I have a lot of respect for what NC State has done on offense this year. They would be dumb to try to go after Leonard Moore repeatedly. Just is what it is at the end of the day. I think he's the best cover corner in college football, and I think his performance against Boise State kind of helped remind people of that fact. So I think Christian Gray is going to have a big day. Just depends on for who. And obviously, we are both predicting it to be in favor of the Fighting Irish. But, folks, that's going to do it for part 1 of today's show. Don't go anywhere, because the rest of today's show, we're just talking ball, talking about this awesome slate of college football games that are going on this weekend. But before we get there, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you are subscribed to this channel. Also, make sure you're subscribed to the CFB Nation channel. Vince and I are going live tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern time for the next installment of the Spread Option. You're not going to want to miss that one. Also, make sure you have this notification bell hit. On whatever streaming platform you listen to us on, we'd greatly appreciate a 5-star review But as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com.